Our host, as normal, is myself, Sean Walsh, and James Bembridge, and we have this extremely special guest this evening, which is Romy Sinak, who's too sophisticated for our taste, but she's agreed to come along.
And not by threat of gunpoint either, we must add.
Well, we didn't need to mention that, did we?
There might have been some bribery involved.
Yeah, there might have been. Well,
yeah, including never come back again.
This is the only way we get guests onto this so-called podcast, whether through bribery or sheer pity, really.
Normally pity, actually.
But Romy, you're right of the Conservative woman, aren't you?
I am, yes. I write on my Substack as well, but yeah, I have written for TCW quite a bit, yeah.
Is there kind of like a running theme with your pieces, or?
I think I started actually. Yes, my first piece was about the NHS and mental health. Well, actually, it was more about the concept of mental health problems, which I think has become increasingly nebulous. The term mental health problems, and as someone who's had an actual mental illness for most of my adult life, I kind of get increasingly frustrated with the sort of fashionable trend around mental health problems. So that was my first article, and I've written about the NHS. I've written about lockdown. That was what really got me to be a regular writer. So I was very against lockdowns and vaccine mandates and all that. So I became a bit of a regular. I've not been able to write that much recently, sadly, with my health, but it was quite prolific at one point. Hope to get back to that soon.
So have you got a sort of long-standing health issue?
Yeah, so for me, this all sort of started when I was a young teenager, and actually my NHS grievances go back that far. So so when I say when I was a teenager, that was obviously just 10 years ago, but no, it wasn't really. It was about 30 years ago now, which is, far too long. So, I mean, I've been aware of the NHS's problems for maybe longer than most. I think it's only been recently that I guess it's almost been it's acceptable now to criticize the NHS. It hasn't been like that for many years. And I think only now, actually, in a sense, that people criticize the institution. I think it's still very taboo to criticize frontline NHS workers, actually.
Yes.
That's something that I'm actually working on a piece at the moment about that I think we're okay as far as criticizing NHS managers goes. But when it comes to actually pointing out that all doctors and nurses might not be saints, that's where you get into sort of problems.
Yes, I agree with that.
People really do not tolerate it. I've had outright abuse, actually, for saying, that some doctors, should be sacked for, malpractice. And I mean, I personally would institute much harsher penalties for, and I don't mean just making mistakes. Now, obviously, you're going to make mistakes, even as a doctor or as a nurse. But some of the outright abuse that goes on in the NHS, and nobody really gets held accountable for it ever. I guess we've seen that with Lucy Letby as well. People do turn a blind eye to things quite easily.
What I don't understand, Romy, is that when you get these people on Twitter saying something like, if I were to give an example of the bad service, horrific service, really, that I and my family have received at the hands of the NHS, then they'll come back and say, oh, actually, I had a really good experience with Dr. So-and-so, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, it's absolutely astonishing, a health service delivering on its promises. It's nothing to praise about. And do they not realise they are a customer? They're not just a patient, they are paying for this. It's not charity.
Yeah, doctors are supposed to make you better, that's kind of the point of the job. But it is this weird attitude. And also they'll say that, won't they, as though their good experience makes up for your absolutely appalling experience. Well, it doesn't matter, you nearly died, because I've had this amazing experience. So, I've had all of that. And you're right, people are so grateful for like a minimum standard of care.
They've been so traduced by this awful health service that they really are so grateful even just to get a nurse who, smiles at them and talks to them about the telly or something, basically.
Exactly. Somebody being nice to them. It is quite sad. And I mean, my mother, who is a vicar of 8 churches, as she always reminds me, She obviously interacts with a lot of people, and that involves a lot of elderly people, people who have a lot of dealings with the NHS in one form or another. And the number of relatives that contact her, relatives of elderly people especially, who say, if we weren't visiting our relative in hospital on a daily basis, we really fear that they might have died. Yes. Because no one was making sure they were fed, no one was giving them water, no one was checking on their medication. We picked up on some glaring error that had occurred with their medication, and if that hadn't been picked up by us, no one else would have picked it up. And yes, a certain amount of that is obviously, staffing issues as well. But it does seem to me that it takes the same amount of time to put a glass of water within someone's reach, or, a few centimeters too far away from them to get. And yes. I do feel like the standard of nursing has seriously dropped. Maybe even since it became a degree profession. There's an argument about that maybe the type of people going into nursing aren't always the best people. But it is, you are seriously gaslit when you mention yes. nurses not being nice to you. Or
there's just a really kind of creepy mentality that's in the NHS, the heart of it. I mean, one of my friends who was a psychiatrist for the NHS, they've since ended her contract because she dared to talk to one of her patients about potential vaccine harms. And she said that when she first went to this hospital and one of the nurses there introduced herself, proud as punch, as the, I think she described herself as the angel of death. And then my friend said, what do you mean by that? And she's basically admitted that if she thinks that a patient is on their way out, then she will show them a so-called kindness by helping them on their way quicker.
Right. Is this sort of the Liverpool care pathway mentality?
Yeah, it's never really gone away, has it? I don't think.
I don't think so. I mean, again, my mother's had experience of this, people saying, yes, they just stopped giving a patient water because they just thought, well, they're going to die anyway. So, we might as well just withdraw basic stuff.
I mean, I
think off the record, yeah.
I've told the story about my father, I think, on this podcast before, but I'll do it very, very briefly because obviously it's pertinent to the conversation. So my father had a rare form of blood cancer, mantle cell lymphoma. My mother luckily found a drug trial for him that gave him an extra 15 years of life, which is unheard of with that form of cancer. And when my mother and father met his oncologist, and my mother said, we want to put Guy on this clinical drug trial in Plymouth, his oncologist said, oh yes, I've heard of that. And my mother said, well, why didn't you tell us then? And she said, well, Plymouth's a bit far to drive, isn't it? What, to save your life? And then when my father was finally on his deathbed, this nurse came in after he'd been in there about 5 hours. And she said, oh, we just need to change his bedding. And so she demanded that me and my family go into one of the other rooms for 5 minutes or so. We come back, and then 2 minutes later, he's dead. I mean, I think that's too much of a coincidence.
Yeah. As out of matter of interest, I'm so sorry, James. I mean, you've told me before, but every time I hear it, it's just unbearably bad. Did you ever make an official complaint? Did you ever go down the sort of?
We didn't because we were just so distressed about the whole matter afterwards, and we never got. We just didn't really want to come to terms with the fact that could be a possibility that she did actually kill him.
Yeah, it's so difficult, and actually the complaints process in and of itself is designed to wear you down and make you give up. I mean, I've made a couple. The last serious complaint that I made was, hang on, when did I come out? So I came out of a 6-month forced stay in a clinic, a mental health clinic in 2017. The way that I was forced in was very well, it's interesting. There's a massive legal grey area actually in mental health, where you don't have to be sectioned. You can just be under constant threat of section to force you to comply with treatment. And this was the state that I was in for 6 months, basically, that they said, if you don't voluntarily admit yourself to this clinic, we will section you. And so obviously it was like, it's basically having a gun to your head and saying, sign this piece of paper. So I had to comply. And also that meant I had to comply with every aspect of the treatment in the clinic, which meant forced medication. It meant restraint at time. It meant being watched in the shower. It meant being watched on the toilet. It meant being observed when I was sleeping. I actually woke up a couple of nights and had a male nurse leaning over me, apparently to check I was still breathing, but you can imagine how terrifying that is.
Yeah.
So terrible. I mean, it was one of the worst experiences of my life. I came out basically to some very sheepish psychiatrists and psychologists when I then had an assessment. Throughout the 6 months, I didn't actually have a psychiatric assessment. That was the whole thing, is that I was never properly assessed. And then when I did have an assessment, they were like, oh, yes, well, maybe that wasn't really the best place for you. You do seem to have got slightly worse after this 6 months. And of course, none of that was ever put on the record. So Mum and I thought, well, we better make an official complaint about this, obviously. But the complaints process in and of itself was so horrific. It was basically, well, outright lies for a start, things being misrepresented. And the absolute sort of piece de resistance was when I said, well, the crux of the whole matter is I never had a proper psychiatric assessment before being admitted to this place. And they said, well, yes, you did. You did when you were in the general hospital, not the psychiatric hospital. You did have a psychiatric assessment. And I said, well, no. So I did freedom of information request, got all my medical notes. And I said, well, can you tell me where in my medical notes this assessment was? And they pointed me to the exact page and they said, this is where the assessment is recorded. And I was literally staring at a blank piece of paper. They had directed me towards a blank piece of paper. And this is actually the Parliamentary Health Ombudsman. I got right through to the end stage of the complaints process. And they were literally saying to me that there was a psychiatric assessment and directing me to a blank piece of paper. And I remember like sitting in the living room, staring at my mother, saying, well, where do we go from here? Because they've essentially fabricated evidence. I mean, do I go to the police? I mean, do I go to the papers? I mean, there was nothing left for me to do. And if you actually Google Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman, you will see that a lot of people have a similar experience whereby, lies by doctors will be taken as fact, test results will be doctored. And what do you do when you have the people that are supposed to be investigating complaints actually helping the NHS cover up their mistakes?
Yes.
And this is a real issue. And there are no politicians, sadly, brave enough to take it on. No. That's the problem I've had. I have gone to my MP, but, you always get sympathy, and that's about it, really.
Yeah, sympathy, but no action, yeah. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
There was that girl recently, very tragic case. I forget what she was afflicted with, but she was dying, and she wanted, again, we've heard so many cases like this in the UK. Someone's dying and they're basically being imprisoned in an NHS ward. And even though they've raised funds to go to another country to receive experimental treatment, the NHS and the courts don't allow them to. What was her name again? I forget now. I think she was.
I know the case you mean. She wanted to go to Canada.
Archie Battersby.
Pardon? No, that's another one, Sean. No, that's another one, Sean. No, the latest one, though, it was heard in court that the girl, because the girl had gone against the wishes of her doctor and said, no, I want to live, I want to try this treatment, he accused her of being insane.
Yeah. But that is what they use. This is like what I was saying about how I ended up being forced into this clinic for 6 months. That they use the fact that you disagree with the proposed treatment as proof of insanity, as proof that you're mentally unstable. And the fact that my mother and actually my sister, who was there at the time supporting me, that they both disagreed with it was just seen as proof that they were colluding with my insanity. So you can't really win. That's the problem.
It's really like the tales we hear from like Victorian times when so-called hysterical women were put into insane asylums.
No, this is very true. I mean, to a certain extent, we haven't really moved on from that. And I do wonder whether it is also to do with a slight culture of arrogance, sadly, within the medical profession, that, to challenge doctors is very much still seen as taboo. For you as the patient to say, well, actually, no, I think I know better what's best for me. That's seen as somehow being unreasonable, maybe even questioning science. God knows we've heard that enough, haven't we, recently? Questioning science. And yeah, and the problem is, as a patient, what's your way out of that? Because if, you know, all you have is basically, I guess, asking for a second opinion, but then that isn't always granted either.
There's so many, well, you know, so many doctors that are in the kind of club who wouldn't dare wish to go against one of their colleagues.
No, this is it. I mean, my brother-in-law is actually a consultant at Leeds General Hospital, so it's not like I think all doctors are essentially evil, but he would say the same thing, you know, that actually it is very much a tight club. I think that's a great word, James. Actually, it becomes a bit of a clubby type atmosphere where people will, even if they're not consciously covering up someone's mistakes or someone's bad behavior, they're just very willing to side with their fellow doctor rather than give the patient the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
So it does need a cultural change, I think, as well in the medical profession. Maybe
it's also why I just despise socialized healthcare, though, because there is no incentive really to treat the patients. They're you know, they're a burden as soon as you're not earning extra money off them.
Yes, yeah, no, I mean, I think you're so right, and you know, this idea that there's almost a bit of an attitude that they're doing you a favor sometimes.
Oh, no, that's completely the attitude that they give. Absolutely. No, it's no. You know, I always say the NHS is free at the point of uselessness. Actually, I think it's
a good catchphrase.
It's more sinister than that sometimes. There. Do we have anything else to add on the NHS, Sean, or shall we move on to the ghost thing?
Over to you.
Well, we're short of time, so well, speaking of ghosts, do you know Romy? I mean, obviously you can see Sean. You know, he looks like a bedraggled ghoul or corpse. I mean, at this point, I don't even have to phone him. I just have to get a Ouija board out to summon his presence. And we are
coming Halloween.
and we are coming up to Halloween. So, Sean, do you want to kick us off with ghosts?
No, I'm not specifically Halloween. Hello, Romy. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine, Sean. How are you?
I'm okay. Nothing about ghosts specifically, but about my view about there are two specific things I think the philosophers look over. One is the nature of humor, what makes people laugh, and the second is the philosophy of the supernatural and the nature of paradigmatically ghosts. So I'm interested in that. He can't shut up, can he? He's still talking.
Sorry. Go on, Sean.
Just kind of, he's gone out for a fag, hasn't he? He's still coming in.
I told you I can't afford.
Is that right? If I got that right, is that what's happening?
Obviously not, because I'm still here. Honestly, you must excuse Romy. You must excuse Sean, Romy, the Priory. So,
okay, hang on. I was perfectly quiet, so let me have my go.
No, please do.
Right.
It was mid-flow there.
And I'm sort of interested in ghosts as a philosopher, as whether or not they exist, and even if they don't exist, then they're interesting in other ways. That's my interest in ghosts. I'm not sure I believe in them, in the sense that don't think I've actually ever experienced one. But the idea of the ghost, I think, of interesting in terms of literature and philosophy. So that's my point. I'm coming across as really more boring than I do on Twitter, and that's pretty high bar.
Only because I think you're being extra cautious and you're behaving yourself in front of Romy.
Well, okay.
God knows why. My Twitter's full of angry ranting, so I mean, it's not exactly that interesting most of the time.
All right, can I reiterate it then?
Please.
I think there are. Shut up, James.
I was being kind to you for once. Take the compliments. They're in short supply.
Compliment.
I think there's something very interesting about the nature of ghosts. I think ghosts exist, but I think even if ghosts don't exist, something interesting about very much the interesting ghosts, because they ramify through the literature. Can I put it like that? Is that a reasonably good way of putting it?
It sounds nice. I don't know.
What do you think about
Shut up, James. You've had your go.
That was my fault. I talked over him then. I'm really sorry. What do you think about evil spirits, Sean?
I'm not interested in them. I don't think they're evil.
You don't think there's like good and evil ones? You
But
don't think there's...
look, there's good and evil people, so it must stand to reason that there's good and evil spirits.
Romy, I think you'll agree with me that I was reasonably quiet while James was ranting on about this rubbish.
I'm not even interrupting you, Sean, honestly. Anyway, well, okay, I'll tell you about an experience.
No, we're talking about...
Right, okay, Sean, you carry on and I'm going out for a fag.
Okay.
Go on then, the floor's yours.
Well, you've thrown me now, haven't you? Romy, what do you think? Who do you think's in the right here? Is it me, Bembridge, or the ghost?
The ghost. Well, Bembridge is a bit like a ghost because I can't see him. So, yeah, that's fine.
We are joking, by the way. Honestly,
of course you are. Of course you are. I'm wondering about this.
No.
Oh, he's gone out for a fag, James.
Yes, I'm going out now. I'll be 30 seconds. You two carry on.
What literature were you referring to when you said about ghosts in literature? I find that really interesting.
Dickens, M.R. James, Susan Hill, who actually for some unforeseen reason follows me.
Actually, oh wow, okay.
Yeah, she does. Yeah. Why? What do you mean? Why? Thanks very much.
You've got better followers than me on Twitter, Sean. I'm very impressed.
Shakespeare. You've got Banquo's Ghost. You've got these all ramifications of stuff that can't be explained that cascades through the normal literature, which seems to me to be quite interesting. How do you define what a ghost is? I don't know. I suppose in each iteration, you'd have to say that this is something that you can't quite explain.
What would you say when people talk about, like a sixth sense? Because I've often thought that, when people just say, there's just something that I'm sensing, and it is like, it's just outside of the normal, I suppose, our normal frame of reference, our normal way of explaining things. They just have feelings about maybe a place or a situation, and it is just like a sort of tapping into a spiritual realm, I guess, for want of a better way of saying it.
I think you have to make that. Have I really annoyed him, or is he just playing that he's annoyed?
Can't hear him, so he might still be having a fag.
He's a bit sensitive. I think it's a good question. It depends on whether you locate the ghost with the place the ghost is placed at, or if the ghost accompanies you when you lose place. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know. I've never been actually acquainted with one, but I do have a theory of ghosts. In that you can't rule them out. On what basis do you rule out?
I agree. Actually,
you've got two options. You can either say supernatural is completely impossible.
Yeah.
Well, why would you say that? The universe is impossible. In that case, you go to the empirical. We say in that case, you gather the evidence to explain what you've seen. And it seems to me that a lot of people have explained stuff that you have to acknowledge is very, very strange.
Yes.
And they scrabble in the favor of naturalistic descriptions of what they've seen, whereas the more simple explanation would be, no, it's just a ghost or a poltergeist. Well, that could be the more simple explanation. I'm not saying I agree with that.
Yeah, but
I don't see why people rule this out a priori, if I can put it like that.
I think it might be because some people find it unsettling, the idea that there is something else sort of beyond us, beyond the human scientific world, whatever you like to call it. And I think a lot of people just almost don't want it to be true.
But they're not going, Romy, they're not going beyond the scientific realm, are they? They're excluding a certain possibility of explaining the scientific realm when they rule certain stuff out.
Well, it's like ruling out the existence of God, isn't it? I think it's the same for a lot of people. I think a lot of people.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to interject again?
You are, James, obviously.
Okay, well, Sean and I were having this conversation, I think, the other day. I found, and I don't understand it at all, when speaking to atheists, if I speak about ghosts, then it rouses them to almost uncontrollable anger sometimes. I've no idea why. Whereas if I talk about God, they're perfectly fine with that, although they don't believe in his existence. But when it comes to ghosts, they get very irrationally angry. I'm not quite sure why.
That's strange. Yeah, I think it's actually, I've had a similar reaction with even people of faith, that when you talk about, I mean, for me, I've always believed in spirits, for want of a better word. I mean, I actually do believe there are bad spirits, just because of something that I've experienced myself personally. And I know my vicar mum would agree with that, and she's helped some parishioners through some experiences that they've had along those lines. The Church of England, by the way, is absolutely rubbish on this. So they don't, it's not like the Catholic Church where they have, an exorcist sort of on call in every sort of.
We have our exorcists in my church.
Do you? Well, I mean, the Church of England here locally, as we discovered, is not good. And they basically left my mum to her own devices, which wasn't great.
I mean, do you know what the philosopher Roger Scruton said about the Anglican Church? He said it was the most civilized form of atheism he's ever met.
I think it's great.
Very good.
I love that. Yeah. Oh dear. Yes. Dear Justin Welby.
Oh God. Sorry, I meant God. Sorry.
Justin Wokeby, as they call him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's fascinates me. It has always fascinated me, because I've always been, I don't know whether you can call it sensitive to these things, but I've always had quite strong reactions to places as well. So it has happened to me a couple of times that I've been somewhere, actually like historic sites mainly, and I haven't had a clue that something bad has happened there at all, but I've had a terrible feeling and felt quite unwell, almost had physical symptoms, like cold and just not feeling good within myself, and then only discovered afterwards that something horrendous had happened there, or that it had been associated maybe with the occult or something like that. So I'm very open to all these things, and I think, Shauna, I agree with you. I think ruling it out seems actually just a bit silly, really, because so much can't be explained.
Yeah.
Why would you rule out?
James was out of the room when I was saying this, and James, I'm not having a dig. I was actually talking to Romy quite seriously. You've got two options. You either say you rule it out of court a priori and just announce that ghosts don't exist. Not really sure how you can do that. Or you agree that there's a possibility that they do exist, and you investigate the investigations.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, I've as Sean and Romy, I was at Lois Perry's mother's place the other day in Pimlico, and beautiful place. But I went in, and she sat me down on this blood red chaise lounge, and then I felt her hand touch mine, and I looked up to smile at Lois's mother, and then found her to be sat across the room, the other side of the room, and she said, "Oh, don't worry, that's just one of the ghosts." I said, "One of the ghosts? What do you mean?" And she said that her place is so haunted that one of her daughters looked into it, and apparently in that area, directly beneath her back garden, there'd been some sort of sewer tragedy in 1849, I think, where five sewage workers died down there. And she thinks it must be them. And it's just the feeling, the kind of like electric prickly energy you get, and the cold spots. And as I said, I did feel the hand touch mine. And the place that I grew up in, my grandfather's place, which wasn't a new build, it was an old build. It was built in the 1970s, so it wasn't an old place. And so much stuff happened there. But basically, I think the biggest event, scariest event to me, most potent event that sticks in my mind, was when I was going down to the basement to collect some records to bring back upstairs. And then as I turned back to do so, I saw at the behind the far end of the snooker table, a man's hand stuck out behind it rigidly with his fingers open and stuff like that. But it wasn't a ghostly hand at all. It was like a big red-blooded man's hand, and just stayed there. when I saw it. It stayed there for about 5 seconds, then slowly withdrew behind the snooker table. And obviously I screamed bloody murder for my mother and father to come down and see if there was a man there, which of course there wasn't. So yeah, I truly believe in all this stuff because I've experienced.
Those are two perfect Halloween stories, aren't they? But
Aren't
I mean,
just?
I can't believe. Also, just that what happened to you recently with the hand touching yours at Lois Perry's mum's.
Yeah,
that's so sinister. But I mean, like I said, I'm very open to this, and I think I've told you this before, James. But my mum had a very, very unsettling experience when she was en route to pray with a parishioner who was being troubled by, for want of a better word, a sort of evil spirit. She was seeing, I have to add, she has no history of mental illness or no, she wasn't unwell in any shape or form.
She's not an unreliable witness in any way.
No, exactly. And indeed, people around her had reported her dog reacting to something that they couldn't see as well. So this was all very sinister, and she was really very disturbed by it. And so mum was en route to pray with her and got out for a few seconds of the car to pop into the village school to say she couldn't attend the parents meeting. She's on the school board. And literally, she was only away from the car for a minute and a half or so. And the car windows were smashed. And all that was taken was the bag with the Bible in it, which was on the seat. And there were people on the streets, the roads of the village, and nobody saw anyone smash the car windows. Nobody saw anyone drive off or walk off, and it was just a complete mystery that these windows were just smashed. The Bible was gone. There was glass everywhere, and it was just one of the most spooky things that's ever happened to either of us.
That's
and
strange.
We never found out what happened either. The police, they had no idea what happened, and it was. Yeah, very, very unsettling. Needless to say, my mum, being like the woman she is, she just put a coat over the broken glass and drove to see the lady anyway, which I would not have done. I probably would have hidden at home. But yeah, so I am very open to all of these things, and I actually think that it's one of these areas that's often laughed at, isn't it? Like people make jokes about.
Well, they do, but then if you ask them, would they ever dabble in a Ouija board stuff or stuff like that?
No.
Then they always say no.
No, I wouldn't, definitely not. No. Again, I've heard horrible things about those, so I wouldn't do that.
So what are we all doing for Halloween?
Well, us being a vicarage, we don't celebrate Halloween as such, but we do have a pumpkin. That's like my mum's concession to me. And there's actually a beautiful All Souls service. So I guess that's not Halloween really, but I always look forward to that because we light candles in memory of the dead, which is always very moving.
Well, it's Hallows Eve, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But to be honest, I'm not one of these Christians that is against Halloween parties per se, especially for kids. I think as long as it's all good fun, I'm fine with it. And I have been known in my student days to dress up as something very non-threatening for a Halloween party. But I've got no plans apart from the All Souls Church service. How about you guys?
Well, I always love Halloween because it's the one day in the year where no one thinks that my dress looks peculiar in any way.
There's no makeup required.
Actually, Romy, he's wrong about that. It's the one day he thinks people don't look. He looks.
Well, I don't actually have a party set for Halloween. I suppose the nearest event to that I have is I'm going to the Battle of Ideas. I don't know if you are, Romy.
I'm not, sadly, no. Hoping to watch some of it online afterwards because it does look like a good one.
Yeah, well, I've not even looked at so.
Well, I'm too stupid for that, so obviously I'm not invited. So.
Oh no, you're not too stupid, Sean. You always actually make me feel stupid.
I'd love to watch a panel with Sean. I think it could be the most. How to describe it?
Be arrested.
Yeah, exactly. Did I tell you, Romy, that Sean is actually doing quite a beautiful film script or play script?
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
I mean, yes, it's cool.
Romy's not going to know what we're talking about here.
Okay,
so
no.
Carry on anyway. Go on.
So, it's very good. I mean, I've always been interested in true crime, and Sean's doing a script called Fred and Rose: The Early Years. But he's kind of envisioned it as a romantic comedy. I'm joking. He's not really. He's not really.
I don't know what we're talking about, do you?
No, it's just some sort of sick in joke that we have amongst many.
I just think it's interesting that Fred and Rose West actually met each other. So I imagine the blind date.
One Cilla Black's blind date.
Romy,
Sean.
Nowadays, you blame dating apps, wouldn't you? Now you'd think, maybe these sort of like minds can meet on some sort of twisted dating app, but that was, of course, way before then. So
they didn't have those obligations in those days, Romy. So my point is that
we've got about 30 seconds, Sean.
Oh, okay.
What do we do? Do we leave it? I think we've pretty much wrapped up, haven't we? I don't think we need to go further, do we?
I take your lead. I'm fine with what I think. Sean should have the last word, though.
Yeah, Sean.
Fred and Rose. The early years. How did they meet? They discovered opera and various forms of serial killing.
No, you're one.
Halloween love story.
Sorry, is that right? Oh, he's having a go at me. He's having a go at me. It's like I'm his bloody boyfriend or something, which is not ever going to happen.
Oh, I've got a new potential one, actually. I don't have time to tell you about it. He's an organ player in more ways than one.